At 12:30 p.m. on November 22nd, Abraham Zapruder filmed the assassination with an 8mm color movie comprised of 486 frames, taking 26 seconds to run. Officials later numbered each frame. Within 8 hours, he had the film developed and 3 copies made. With 30 minutes after he obtained the developed film and its copies, at about 9:30 that evening, the 22nd, he gave 2 of the copies to the local Secret Service, who quickly flew one to its Washington headquarters. 2 days later, Sunday the 24th, Secret Service headquarters directed the other copy be flown to Washington, where the FBI would make a copy for itself, which it did. On Tuesday, the FBI returned the copy to Dallas. On Saturday morning, the 23rd, 20 hours after he had recorded the movie, Zapruder sold the original and the remaining copy to Life magazine for a small fortune. By courier, Life flew both to Chicago, arriving by midday on Saturday the 23rd. The film became a key component in the Warren Commission investigation and the heart of the argument in numerous books, as well as the countless commentary and many controversies that ensued. Through 4 decades, it has often been the focus of dissent from and defense of the official findings. Coming to terms with the film is an imperative for addressing many difficulties and many difficult problems. We shall examine 2 treatments of the film by citizens. One taken from the left wing of dissent from the official findings, and the other from the extreme right wing of support for the official findings. Then we shall note one of the many instances of the Warren Commission's clever but corrupt use of the film, and conclude by noting 2 of the many important evidentiary facts the film holds for those who insist on seeking the truth about the murder of President John F. Kennedy. For more than 25 years, a group of assassination theorists have charged the federal agencies corrupted the film in order to sustain the lone assassin conclusion of the Warren Commission, as well as to protect the conspiracy they claim slew JFK. They point to a number of apparent inconsistencies within the film, curious details in some frames, and other allegedly odd elements, but all sufficient, they insist, to argue the film has been surreptitiously altered. To achieve that pernicious end, they further maintain, conspirators spirited the film away the day of the assassination to a secret site, inflicted forgery upon it, and then covertly returned it to Zapruder in time for him to sell it the next day. In recent years, their ranks have grown in number, and their arguments have become more forceful, some would say strident. They have appeared on numerous radio and television shows. They have presented their charges and assertions in lectures and meetings to numerous individuals uninitiated in the factual details of the assassination. And among librarians and archivists and journalists, they have assiduously promoted their doctrines with what must be termed missionary zeal. Let us examine the charge of corruption. The initial difficulty a critical view confronts rests on the corruptionists' apparent impoverished grasp of the facts that ignores the absolute lack of any early knowledge of what the film held. By early afternoon of the 22nd, knowledge that Zapruder had taken a movie was rather widespread. An understanding of what was on the movie was not. Zapruder himself did not know if his amateur filming had captured the assassination. This profound uncertainty lasted until about 4:30, when in the Kodak laboratory in Dallas, Zapruder permitted the Just Process film to be shown to a small group of largely staff personnel, where the gripping scenes shocked the viewers. So, these claimed forgers would not have known its contents before 4:30 p.m. Indeed, the possibility that Zapruder's endeavor to film might have fizzled was real. Some other films taken that day in Dealey Plaza have turned out to have blank sequences, or were shot in non-important areas, or were otherwise not with much merit. Then further compounding the alleged conspirators' black designs is a staggering fact that over 700 films of all types were taken that day, totaling perhaps 30,000 frames. How then could any of these unnamed sinister individuals who allegedly manipulated the film know that Zapruder's film alone, out of all of these, was the evidentiary jewel, the pearl in a tub of pebbles, and not Bronson's or Hughes's or any of the others? They could not. Next, we observe that on the first day, federal officials involved in the investigation, the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service, and perhaps others, were decidedly casual about all film, meaning the federal tainting of the film was not yet underway. The FBI even issued orders not to collect any film, including that shot by professional photographers. The only photographs and motion pictures the FBI examined were forced upon them by the media, like the Zapruder film and Dillard's photographs and Willis's slides. Film they could not prudently avoid without having public focus upon the Bureau. Zapruder actually had to thrust his movie into Secret Service hands. The CIA's first study was based on Life magazine's published photographs about 4 days after the assassination. The FBI ignored it until the 24th, where in the hundreds of thousands of pages of the documents, which I have read, that relate to those first few days, is there any concern about the evidence in the film? I have not found it. And it would have had to have been there if they were really concerned about the evidence it held. Also critical to the refuting the corruption charge is the fact that the cabal had no opportunity to steal it. The chain of possession is thoroughly attested. Theft was impossible. No film stolen, no fraud committed. Because of the time necessary to perform the various alleged alterations, it had to have been stolen hours before sale. After Life owned it, manipulation would have been impossible. The Secret Service copies in Dallas and Washington, the FBI dub in Washington, and the original and copy in Chicago, later New York, went their various documented independent ways to end up in 4 different cities in the hands of 2 federal and 1 private organization, making any toying of the original immediately detectable if compared to the scattered true copies. 3 armed guards, 2 Dallas policemen with shotguns, and 1 armed Secret Service agent were with Zapruder from 1 o'clock, right after he took the movie, until 4:30 in the afternoon when Kodak finished developing the original. 8 good, loyal employees were in the laboratory while the Secret Service agent actually went into the developing room where he monitored the processing. Zapruder's partner waited outside the only door. Later at Jameson's duplicating laboratory across town, Zapruder actually oversaw the work of duplicating inside the dark room. And about midnight in his home in Dallas, 3 witnesses affirmed that Zapruder still possessed the original film, which he had just shown to his family. When he arose about 6 o'clock the next day, he still owned it. So only in those 6 hours of sleep could the film have been covertly acquired and rushed to the dark laboratories of forgery and treason and then snuck back. Yet to perfect a corruption of the film would require a minimum of many hours and perhaps several days. The act of theft itself would take an hour. Flight to and from Washington would consume 6 hours. Chemical processing and drying of the doctored film would take 2 hours. Painting and drying the forgeries on hundreds of frames, an estimated 3 to 50 hours. Organizational technical problems of what and how, where to forge would consume yet other hours. In other words, the film could not be stolen, corrupted, and returned to Dallas until several hours after it had been shown and sold and left to Life magazine's headquarters in Chicago. And this estimate suffers from idealism because it would probably have taken several days. But more than that, you're faced with another problem, and that's the problem of Zapruder's character. He was a businessman, an outstanding citizen. Zapruder was an astute businessman, long inured to the ways of buying and selling and pressures and procedures, and from the outset, from the very moment he got back to his office, he said he intended to sell the film and refused small offers on his way to the Kodak laboratory. He would never have jeopardized the value of his film by permitting it to be manipulated. And this Russian immigrant, Zapruder, like so many of those immigrants who have arrived on our shore, impoverished and by sweat and toil gained a better life, was a loyal American. There's no way around that. But in addition to Zapruder's personality being a barrier that cannot be scaled by the charge the film was corrupted, and in his home that night was his married daughter, Myrna. She practically worshipped John F. Kennedy. With a fierce, unquenchable loyalty, she would never have permitted anyone to take or tinker with that film. Only by baldly ignoring her presence and hiding her Blondelian loyalty can corruptionists assert their claim that the conspirators purloined the film. But what has been said of Zapruder is even more true of life in terms of its commercial interests. It would brook no interference in this money-making machine that they had acquired by purchase in Dallas. But in addition to these already advanced arguments, the claim of forgery must have included a number of insurmountable technical problems. To accomplish a covert corruption of the film, the unnamed conspirators would have to possess the equipment necessary to pull it off. The mucking work would require sophisticated and costly machinery, along with a range of highly trained technicians. But there's no evidence whatsoever presented that they possessed that machinery. Not a single piece of evidence. But more than that, on Sunday the 24th, the Washington FBI office could not even make a simple dub of the Zapruder copy that they had received in Washington from the Secret Service. They had to wait till Monday till a local private lab opened so they could make it. And more than that, in Dallas, FBI agents held the film up to a naked light bulb to see what was on it. They weren't quite sure what was there, except Kennedy was on there. The CIA, with its vaunted MPIC, National Photographic Intelligence Center, did not possess even an ordinary projector to enable it to view the film on Sunday the 24th. And when I interviewed the head of that lab, Dino Brugioni, he was very clear. 82 years old and his mind clear as a bell. He said the Secret Service came that evening and the director of the CIA called him, Brugioni up at home and ordered him into the lab. And he was to make duplicates of certain frames, all concerned with the area around Stem and Street sign. Secondly, to time the film. And they did not have a projector to even show the film. And they had to open up a local private photographic lab in Alexandria, Virginia, and take out a movie projector to take it to CIA headquarters so they could look at it. Even more stunning is the fact that when the CIA on Monday the 25th studied the Life magazine photographs, it concluded the shots that had been fired on Dealey Plaza were fired at frame numbers violently clashing with the official Oswald lone assassin scenario and defined a conspiracy. In itself, that posed the kibosh over the face of the claim the CIA corrupted the official film. They said the film showed it was a conspiracy. Even with machines and specialist handlers available, which they were not, the procedures they would have to follow to commit forensic crime are so extraordinary and scientifically difficult, they render a charge of forgery as irrational as it is preposterous. One frame, a quarter of an inch wide, would have to be projected to a 3-foot wide screen, photograph taken, then you'd have to work at it. You'd have to get color balance, light balance, and on. And then it would have to be photographed back down. And you'd have hundreds of those frames to work at. It was be a very difficult job. But more than that is a singular fact that comes into play. What do you forge if you're going to forge a film? In Dallas, in those first hours and even weeks, all was turmoil and confusion reigned. Command posts were awash with rumors and rife with controversies. For a month, officials tussled with the possibility that the next shot to JFK might have come from the front, before they finally had devised a way to make the evidence show that it came from behind. Not until September 1964, 2 weeks before the Warren report was issued, did officials desperately resort to hearsay 5 times removed by a Washington desk clerk without any knowledge of or training in or comprehension about the subject of fingerprints, J. Edgar Hoover, to claim that Oswald's palm print was found on the rifle. The official evidence defined the print as not related to the rifle found on the 6th floor depository. So they did it by fiat. Hoover wrote a letter. And it's curious that you would take testimony in the assassination of the President of the United States by correspondence, by someone who's not an authority. And so the eyewitnesses were not fully identified for years, and critics continued to work on it. And for several days, officials did not impose frame 210 of the Zapruder film as the time of the first possible shot by Oswald, and on with hundreds of bits of evidence. What then could these claimed forgers know to forge in only those first few hours that they had to do the forging? More than that, they claim that the film was forged to mask a conspiracy, and in this they are adamant. Yet the film, as it now exists, not only clearly proves a conspiracy killed John F. Kennedy, but it does so in many solid ways. And that fact, it seems to me, means the film was not forged to hide a conspiracy. So I claim that this charge of altering the film is not even a theory, because a theory requires a wisp of fact to have legs to walk on. And I can't find any facts. So let us go now to another area. And this is the use of the Zapruder film by an extreme right-wing defender of the Warren Commission findings. And this would be Gerald Posner. And he wrote a bestseller, Case Closed, Lee Harvey Oswald and the Assassination of JFK. Now in these books defending the Warren Commission, you have to treat, and by serious publisher and serious authors, you have to treat them seriously. You don't say that they're no good because you don't like the man. You look at it in terms of the facts. And you have to relate those facts to the evidentiary base and do it very, very carefully, which is what I have done, as well as several hundred other individuals in America. So it's not a immediate reaction. It's a very careful study and relating to the evidentiary truth. And this is how you must treat anyone that supports the Warren Commission findings. And as I go through Mr. Posner's work, I found many, many areas that were less than satisfactory. And I'd like to go into one of them, if I may. In Case Closed, he argues that the official determination that Oswald fired a shot at frame 210 is not correct. According to the Warren Commission and its official findings, that it would be impossible for someone in the Texas School Book Depository, easternmost window of the 6th floor, to have fired a shot before frame 210. A tree blocked the site, and you'd have to wait until after frame 210. That's almost an iron fact of the assassination. And he claims that a shot was fired about 2:24, and that shot went through John Kennedy and then through Governor Conley. And for that, he musters 2 pieces of evidence, in addition to omitting, unfortunately, a lot of other evidence that would have given him a lot of difficulty with his argument. And he says that in frame 224, you can see the governor's lapel flip. It flips. It flips when the bullet passes through. And then he claims there's a physiological reaction of the governor at frame 226. And as primary evidence, he has that frame 224 of the Zapruder film, and he also has the governor's coat, he says. And there's a bullet hole in the lapel. So could I have my first frame here? Now the next slide, please. That's frame 224, which you perhaps can't see. And it shows the Governor Conley in the limousine, and the red arrow points to his lapel right here. May I have the next slide, please? This is taken from Maggie and Art Snyder's article. And there's the governor's, the hole in the governor's suit jacket. You see, it's not in the lapel where it flipped. It's right here. Mr. Posner is not correct, is he? The bullet did not flip the lapel. But if we could return to that first slide, please. You'll notice the flag on the president's car, right on the bumper. If you looked at the flag on Dealey Plaza, you'll notice that it flips, rustles in the wind. He omitted that in his text. But, so what happened there with the governor's lapel was that gusts of wind that windy day spasmodically went across the plaza. It created the flag waving, and it made Jackie's hat almost come off one time, and that flipped his, that explains that lapel. So that's an example of the misuse of the film, or imperfect use, perhaps, would be a better way to say that. So now let us go to an example of the Warren Commission's use of the film. Well, we could use many, many illustrations. We will use just one. We could have a whole course, I think, just on the Warren Commission's use of the film. And what we will do, we will take their eyewitness. The Warren Commission had one witness to Oswald in the window, and they called that in the report their star witness. His name was Howard Brennan, and he was a steam fitter that on his lunch hour came over to the watch the motorcade. And there is the slide, Commission Exhibit 876 in the 26 volumes. You see I have a little red arrow where he sat, and there's the Texas School Book Depository, which is number 1 there, and he sat across from it looking up. And then Mr. Brennan was taken down to police headquarters and was shown a lineup of individuals. And the police lineup in Dallas always had 6 individuals there, and Oswald was always number 2 with a great big 2 over his head. And he was usually in a t-shirt. The others were well dressed, and he had been in some fisticuffs when he was arrested, and he showed that. And once in a while he'd be cussing him out for framing him. And he was asked to pick the man he saw in the window. And he said, I don't see him there. So he went home, and then he saw Oswald twice on television. Then the Secret Service came to him again and said that Oswald was a communist. And so they took him back, and he looked at another lineup, and then he picked out Oswald. And so one sworn statement is proof of the perjury of the other. And then David Bellin, the Commission Counsel, took him to Dealey Plaza in March. If I have the next slide, please. And then they did a reenactment. Much of the Warren Commission report is based on reenactment. It's called attorney's evidence. It's not based on facts. And what they did, they closed most of the windows in the Texas School Book Depository. And they opened the 3 windows on the 5th floor where 3 eyewitnesses allegedly were standing or looking out. And then above, right above the easternmost window on the 6th floor where there's a circle around above the A, the easternmost window, you can't see it, was open just a little bit. And then he was asked, in what looks like legal language and very sophisticated approach, in what window did you see Oswald? And he circled 2. In what 3 windows did you see the ear witnesses? And he circled the only window in the Texas School Book Depository that can't be opened. Now, they also remark in the Warren report that Brennan appears on the Zapruder film, and that he picked himself out on the Zapruder film. I don't have those slides here. It takes a little bit of finesse to present them because it's a detail in the background. But what they left out was this, taking this from Sylvia Meagher, M-E-A-G-H-E-R, and Howard Roffman, R-O-F-F-M-A-N, and my own looking at the Zapruder film. You see Brennan sitting on the little wall, watching the motorcade go by, and he's looking to his left, and then suddenly, at frame 206, he turns and looks to his right. He doesn't look up. Brennan never looked at the window. And the next year in August 1964, he told CBS he saw John Kennedy's head explode in a great big halo of blood. And if you're watching Oswald shoot the shot, you could not simultaneously see the president's head explode. Brennan was not a witness. So this is a clever misuse of the film by the Warren Commission, or perhaps it's just inadvertency on their part. But it destroys the credibility of their star witness. They call him a star witness, and it's the only one they have external to the building. But then we go on to other points within the commission. Evidence within the film that prove a conspiracy. Now recall, the Warren Commission remarked and found that only after frame 210 could a shot been fired from that Texas School Book Depository and hit John Kennedy. So if we can have the next slide, please. This is frames 189 on the top and frames 190 on the bottom. It's very difficult to see here with the lights and the expansion of it. But what it shows is President Kennedy in his limousine coming down Elm Street. And the first slide is very clear and distinct. The second slide, right underneath it, frame 190, is fuzzy. Zapruder, when he looked at it, he said, you know, this must be where I shook when I heard the first shot, or the tremble. And it was caused by an involuntary physiological response. That was his saying. And it suggests, Zapruder said, that must have been when I heard the shot. But more than that, Jackie Kennedy is in the limousine with her husband on frame 189 and 90. Jackie Kennedy is looking to her left at the crowd. And if you look at Jim Towner's photograph, which you can find in old issues of Life magazine in color, you can also see her looking to the left, to the south, at the crowd. She testified in May to the Warren Commission, who waited 6 months to take her evidence, that when she heard the shot, or something was wrong with her husband, she's turned. And you can see her turn in the 190s, 200s, to look at her husband. But more than that, the motorcycle policeman, who was right there, riding right next to her, about 4 feet from her husband, said that after he heard the first shot, Mrs. Kennedy turned to her right. Then more than that, Hugh Betzner took a still photograph at frame 186. And he said, I took the photograph, and 186, and immediately after, I heard a shot, which would correspond to roughly 190. In addition, Phil Willis took a series of 35 millimeter slides on Dealey Plaza, and he took one at frame 202 of the Zapruder film. That's his 5th slide, Willis number 5. And he said, when I took that slide, immediately after, I saw Jackie Kennedy turning to her right, toward the president. Abraham Zapruder stated that when he saw John Kennedy reach up and grab himself. And Marilyn Sitzman, sitting next to him on the pergola on the grassy knoll, said the same thing. There's other witnesses. So at frame 190, it would seem to me that that's proof, along with the witness testimony, and these are solid witnesses. Jackie Kennedy, that motorcycle policeman, who was never called as a witness, and we only got that information because of the audio, the video, the camera taping down the hallway of the Dallas Police Station in the late afternoon of November 22nd, and that was preserved by the sixth floor museum in Dealey Plaza. That a shot came at about 190. There's a lot more information on this, but it seems to me this is shows you how solid this material is. But it's also true that the Warren Commission counsels and the FBI, they looked at this film very, very carefully. There's no question about that. Which takes us then to another series of slides. May I have the next? This is Willis number 5. And right here is the president. This is the, right behind him is the follow-up car, right here. These are Secret Service agents standing on the car. And right there is Dave Powers and Ken O'Donnell, the president's aides, and they have a view of Dealey Plaza and the grassy knoll. They'll later say that the 2 shots came from the grassy knoll. But if I have this next shot, please, next slide, please. Now this is annotation of this slide. See, it captures Abraham Zapruder right there. See? He's standing there on this little concrete, 4-foot tall concrete abutment, shooting his film. Down here is the president, right here. And on a clear view of the slide, you'll also see another thing. Now this is less than half a second before the assassination, and the president's coat is not up. You can see his collar. And you might ask that of Mr. Spector later on, how that fits into the evidence of the single bullet theory. There seems to be a clash there, but the collar's clear. Now, Willis said, I took that slide, taking a series of slides, and just before I was ready to shoot, the shot went off, and the shot caused me to hit it. Click. Now, if we have the next slide, this is Zapruder 202, and here's the presidential limousine, motorcycle policeman, and back here is Willis. Have the next slide, please. This is a blow-up of a detail on that slide, and this is Willis right here. It's him taking the picture, 202. And then if you follow, he takes the picture, and the camera comes down, and he walks down off the into the sprocket area. That camera was moved the film through with cogs, and they stuck in little sprockets here, and it pulled it over through. And when you reproduce the film, it doesn't reproduce the sprocket areas, and so you have to, at the original, it has those, and you can see him raising the camera, taking a shot, bringing it down, then walking off 205, 206 into the crowd. Now, Zapruder 202 captures that. He captures Zapruder. And that means that that coordinates a shot at approximately 190. And that's very powerful evidence. The way that was gotten around, when he testified in July, as Zapruder did, and they ran him through all the photographers in a day and a half, just a terrible rush. And they didn't ask him questions, and Willis himself said that they said, only answer questions we ask you. And he was really badly handled by Warren Commission Counselor Liebler. And what happened, they had to locate him on a map. The map is not as big as this sheet here, a little tiny thing. Since then, the National Archives hasn't been able to locate it, but we saw it back in the 60s. And they asked him after he went home by correspondence where he stood. Asked him to write a letter, and so he wrote a letter to tell them where he stood. Then the map they used was a map made from in May 1964 in the reenactment. And by then the stem and street sign had been moved. We don't know how far, but had been moved some. And so that skews it. And then the line is drawn from Willis to Zapruder through the stem and street sign. And that is not the way you should have done it. Because you can plot the location of Willis by these Zapruder film within the inch. Very, very clear. So it was, evidence was taken by correspondence. But I believe that those slides alone demonstrate that there was a shot roughly around 190. And then with frame 190 and 189, there's further evidence and eyewitness testimony. I think that's very, very strong. I think the Willis Zapruder slides are some of the most important in this whole cinematography area. Now, there's many, many other things in the Zapruder film, but let us go to frame 337, 338. 337. John Kennedy was shot in the head about frame 313, possibly between 312 and 313. And there's a gruesome scene where his head explodes, and then afterwards you can see there's a great gap there, about the size of a grapefruit, I would guess. Huge gap. And then he slowly turns and falls into his wife's lap. And you can see her here. See, that's Jackie Kennedy. This is John Kennedy. That's John Kennedy's head right there. That whiteness there is the great cavity in his head. If you go to the National Archives and take the first generation slides as provided by Life magazine in February 1964 and look at frame 337 on a screen, 5-foot screen. May I have the next slide, please? And this is it, blow up right here. Right there is John Kennedy's head. You see it? It shows him in his wife's arms, like this, with his head here in the great cavity. But the important part there, when it's shown in that original slide, in needle point sharpness, it's unbelievably clear. There's not a hair out of place in the back of his head. And there's no blood on his collar, his shirt, and there's no hole in the back of the head. It's not there. Which suggests, at least, that if Oz was shot from behind, there should have been an entrance hole of some type and blood, and then they claim this is the exit hole. So it seems to me that one has to conclude by the photograph, 337, there is no hole in the back of the head. When you look at that frame, it's not there. But when you go to the very professional medical personnel in Parkland and other people who looked at that head, they do report a terrible wound back there. And you have to relate those two facts. And how do you relate that? Well, to my mind, I believe that the head shattered and the bone with the skin adhering sort of flapped back, act like a gruesome hinge. And it looks like a bullet explosion. But I'm doing that from an inference from this photograph here, 337. My point is, 337 is a very important evidence. We have to take that into consideration and relate it to the medical findings. But more than that, this frame 337 was well known to the commission, and they watched it up through, they had the slide shown to the commission members one evening in July in Washington, D.C. And they stopped at frame 334 And then 335 through 343, they lodged in the National Archives. And they never printed these films in volume 18, pages 1 through 81 of the Warren Commission supplementary volumes. And the individual responsible for that was Arlen Specter. He was a key to that. And he also, when he took the testimony on the slides, these were not by the individuals who did the actual work on the slides. These are indirect, and for legal reasons, that's an important legal point. It amounts to roughly hearsay. But Mr. Specter did that evidentiarily. I would really like to, if he has time, I'd really like to ask him that question of why that happened. Perhaps it was inadvertent, perhaps it was just a problem with publication or something. So unless you were a very careful researcher and went through everything in the National Archives, you would not see this. So I bring my remarks to a close here and say that the Zapruder film is basic to an inquiry into the President's death. And any serious inquirer into the fate of this constitutional republic must consider that film. Thank you very much.